Hello and welcome to this analysis of Act 4, Scene 3 of Othello. As you're watching, make sure you're taking notes. You could be annotating your copy of the play, or you could use this template that I put on the screen, which is designed according to the Cornell note-taking strategy. Or if you're in my class, make sure you're filling in the note-taking sheet I gave you during the lesson. Act 4, Scene 3, where does it come in the play? Well, we've seen the exposition, the marriage, the journey to Cyprus. We've seen the increasing chaos of Act 2, where we've got the storm, we've got the drunken brawl, and Cassio starts to talk to Desdemona alone to try and get her help with getting his job back. We've seen the climax of the play, where Othello has become absolutely enraged over the handkerchief which has fallen into the hands of the courtesan Bianca. And now in the falling action of the play. So in the previous scene, Othello verbally abused Desdemona, who's now a very different character to the determined, self-possessed character of Act 1. And in this scene, we see Desdemona prepare for bed while discussing a woman's infidelity with Emilia. Well, what exactly happens in Act 4, Scene 3 then? Well, at the start, Ludovico and Othello are on stage talking, and I always forget that they're there at the start of this scene when I'm thinking about it, and it's actually really interesting that Shakespeare brings them on stage, because it almost suggests that a woman's privacy, which is what most of the scene is about, and their private conversation is dependent on men giving them permission and giving them the space to be able to do that. Othello then sends Desdemona to get ready for bed, and it's interesting that she obeys his instructions really meekly, really submissively. Then everyone leaves the stage except for Desdemona and Emilia. Emilia then helps Desdemona prepare for bed, wishing that Desdemona and Othello had never met. Desdemona rejects this idea, absolutely insisting on her love for Othello. Desdemona refers to the wedding sheets which are being put on her bed, calling them a shroud, which is what you would use to cover a body for a funeral. And then Desdemona recalls her mother's maid, Barbary, and the willow song she sang before she died. So taking these two details of the scene together, it seems that Desdemona may know what her fate will be when Othello returns, and that she almost willingly accepts that fate. She's not going to fight against what her husband wants. Desdemona then sings the willow song, which tells of love, betrayal and death, and that's where the name of this scene comes from. Often people refer to this as the willow scene. Desdemona naively asks Emilia if women really do commit infidelity. Emilia tells her that women do indeed, and Desdemona asks Emilia if she would ever betray Iago. Emilia implies that she would, if it would make her husband a monarch. She seems to think it's a small price to pay, that it's a little vice, and that actually if you were going to get something from it, something tangible from it, then it would be okay. Emilia tells Desdemona that I do think it is their husband's fault if wives do fail. So she blames women's infidelity on men's unfaithfulness, jealousy and violence. And here we get an insight into what Emilia's marriage to Iago must be like. Emilia insists that women are no different than their husbands, and that they also may wish to experience sex with others just as men might. Desdemona does not accept these arguments, and she goes to bed. The setting for this scene is really interesting. It's unusual in a play in which most of the action takes place outside or in a public space. So if we think of the start of Act 1, it's set in darkness in the streets of Venice and Brabantio is called to the window. If we think of the fight in Act 3, that takes place outside, and Othello and Desdemona leave their bedchamber to witness what's happening and to intervene in what's happening. Other conversations take place in the sagittary, in the public place where political events occur. And throughout the play you see this kind of blending of personal and political. The personal conversations generally take place in a political setting, and so there's a clear impact on the chaos of Othello's marriage, and the impact that then has on the chaos of society. And as Othello's marriage becomes more disorderly, so too does society. Except here we see Desdemona in her private rooms, and we witness quite an intimate scene of a servant helping her mistress prepare for bed. And it's striking that despite Othello's passionate avowals of love at the opening of the play, that this female-dominated scene is much more intimate than anything we have seen between husband and wife. As the genders become polarised towards the end of the play, and by that I mean that Othello, Iago cluster together and Amelia and Desdemona cluster together, it's as if friendship becomes more significant than any kind of romantic connection. For Desdemona, the staging symbolises the limitation of her freedom. So at the start of the play, she's openly stated her opinion in the council chambers in front of a male cast. In Act 2, we see the excitement of travel overseas. It's as if the whole world is opening up in front of her. But now all of that closes down and we see her in the very limited space of the bedroom. It's also really significant that Amelia's speech, which we'll talk about later, which is a forthright defence of women in the play, is staged in a private room with no male characters present. So this tells us that despite Amelia's increasing confidence and outspokenness, she nevertheless feels very restricted when she's in public, and this almost feminist speech has to take place behind closed doors with only women in the room. So, the Willow Song. The poor soul sat sighing by a sycamore tree. Sing all a green willow, her hand on her bosom, her head on her knee. Sing willow, willow, willow. The fresh streams ran by her and murmured her moans. Sing willow, willow, willow. Her salt tears fell from her and softened the stones. Sing willow, willow, willow. And then Desdemona speaks and she says, lay by these. And then she goes back to the chorus of the song, willow, willow. And then she speaks again, prithee, hie thee, he'll come anon. So there she's giving instructions to Amelia, telling her to hurry up because Othello's on his way. And then she goes back to sing, all a green willow must be my garland. Let nobody blame him, his scorn I approve. I called my love false love, but what said he then? Sing willow, willow, willow. If I court more women, you'll couch with more men. Okay, so this is a very mournful folk ballad, and in this song, as Desdemona sings it, it's a woman who laments her lost love. So the poor soul is the woman, the man has betrayed her, he's left her alone by the stream. When she says, kind of towards the middle of the song, let nobody blame him, his scorn I approve. So she's accepting his derision and his derogatory actions towards her. And it's got a really clear link between the scene that we've witnessed, Act 4, Scene 2, the scene that we've witnessed between Othello and Desdemona there. And Desdemona attributes this song to a servant called Barbary, which means foreigner, and it echoes the reference to Othello as a Barbary horse earlier in the play. So the song is somehow connected with the racial tensions within the play. Now, this song wasn't written by Shakespeare, and there's a music book that people have found from 1583 that indicates that it was common in popular culture of the day. And there's lots of different versions of this song around. So whilst Desdemona only sings 2 verses and the chorus, Shakespeare's audience would probably have known how the song ends, which is with the death of the singer. Originally, the song was sung from the male perspective, but Shakespeare changes it to a female voice to make the words appropriate for Desdemona. And that's interesting as well because in terms of what Amelia says in the scene, she's reversing the male privilege to have an affair, and Amelia suggests actually it's okay for a woman to have an affair. So there seems to be a bit of switching between genders in the scene. In the final verse of the original song, the speaker asserts his loyalty even though he's been betrayed, and acknowledges that this heartbreak will send him to the grave. So in the context of Othello, this signals to us that Desdemona is in some way aware of what the future holds for her. And in Act 5, Scene 2, the dying Amelia recalls this song, reminding the audience that Desdemona knew her fate and she accepted it. So this song heightens the pathos for Desdemona. We see an innocent woman betrayed by her husband in an extremely melancholic state on the stage. In stark contrast to Desdemona's melancholy, we see Amelia's realism in this scene, and it might be that Amelia is trying to encourage Desdemona and almost bring her back to herself, get her to fight a little bit for herself. And so Amelia says this speech towards the end of the scene. She says, I do think it is their husbands' faults if wives do fall. Say that they slacken their duties and pour our treasures into foreign laps, or else break out in peevish jealousies, throwing restraint upon us, or say they strike us, or scant our former having in despite. Why? We have goals. And though we have some grace, yet we have some revenge. Let husbands know their wives have sense like them. They see and smell, and have their palates both for sweet and sour as husbands have. What is it they do when they change us for others? Is it sport? I think it is. And doth affection breed it? I think it doth. Is frailty that thus errs? It is so too. And have we not affections, desires for sport, and frailty as men have? Then let them use us well, else let them know the ills we do, their ills instruct us so. Okay, so the first line of this speech, Amelia's blaming the husbands if their wives do fall, as in if their wives do have an affair with someone else. She says that she almost sees husbands and wives as two separate groups here who are at war with each other. And it's a very realistic depiction of marriage, I suppose. She suggests that the initial sense of infatuation is quickly lost, and husbands feel as if they have the freedom to stray. Given what we know about perceptions of Venetian culture at the time, it is clear that here Amelia is talking about women who are entrapped within a patriarchal regime. And we see the impact that this type of society can have on the individual and their feelings about romance and about their life in general. And the speech reveals a deep sense of personal betrayal. So Amelia says that men might pour our treasures into foreign laps. So here she could be talking about money. Potentially the woman has brought a dowry to the marriage and the husband wastes that elsewhere. Or she could be talking metaphorically here about love or a passion that the men use elsewhere. And this may relate to Amelia's own experience with Iago. Then the following line, where she says that men throw restraint upon us, or say they strike us, is an allusion to Othello's treatment of Desdemona. So the restraint is some kind of limitation, and earlier in the play Othello has said that Desdemona should spend more time inside praying, and obviously he struck Desdemona earlier in Act 4. So whilst on the one hand Amelia seems to perceive women's infidelity as a form of revenge against this harsh treatment from their husbands, on the other she presents women's desires for sport as a natural and intrinsic part of existence. So she says, what is it they do when they change us for others? Is it sport? So she's suggesting that men get tired of their wives and look elsewhere for fun. She says, yeah, it probably is. And doth affection breed it? So is this caused by affection for someone else? Probably, she says. Is it frailty? So is it human weakness? She says, yes, it must be as well. So then logically she turns that round and she says, do women not love other people? Do women not want to have fun? Are women not weak, as men are? Therefore, women are also going to have an affair. But that final couple of lines suggests that she's saying that men should treat us well, so men should be loyal to their wives, or else they may discover the truths about their wives' activities. So that repetition of ills in the final line indicates that unfaithful women are only learning from their husbands, and the fact that we've got that full rhyme with no and so suggests that this is almost like some kind of proverb or some kind of received wisdom that Amelia has learned through her life experience and that she's trying to teach to Desdemona. And the passionate justification and explanation of women's behaviour here reveals the unfairness of an unequal society, the double standard within a society which will allow men to have an affair, however women are condemned for it. And this gives voice to a female perspective which has otherwise been increasingly silenced within the play. So I showed you these images in the last video, and I explained how, as we're discussing the play and as you're writing your essays, you have to be able to move seamlessly between the big picture and the smaller details. We've looked at the small details of the scene, so what's the big picture? Well, first of all, the scene's function is to heighten the pathos for Desdemona and for Amelia as we enter the murder scene next. It also emphasises the unfairness of the inequality between men and women in a patriarchal society. And it creates a sense of increasing claustrophobia and entrapment as we progress towards the murders of the final scenes. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you at the next video for Act 5.